The crystal champagne glass hit the marble first. Then, Han Sung-gil's wrist snapped with a sound sharp enough to silence 200 of Seoul's elite mid-conversation. 3 seconds, one controlled strike, and the most feared gangster in Gangnam hit the Grand Hyatt floor like a marionette whose strings just met a combat-trained blade. The crowd froze. Sung-gil's bodyguards reached for weapons, but their hands stalled mid-draw, confused whether to defend a boss who'd just been dropped by a woman in a Dior gown. Security cameras caught everything. 200 witnesses held their breath, but Yong Gyom-rin, Seoul's most elegant crime lord, didn't move to intervene. He stood across the ballroom watching his wife of 3 years, the quiet American he'd married for convenience, reveal she'd never been quiet at all. Just patient, waiting for someone stupid enough to put hands on what was hers. They say secrets are the currency of the powerful. Here at Afro-Korean Script with Maya, we're just getting started. Hit that subscribe button if you have an appetite for the unthinkable. Stay close. Our archives are only going to get deeper. The penthouse overlooked the Han River from 43 floors up, all glass and minimalist luxury designed to showcase Seoul's glittering sprawl. Niel had lived there for 3 years without ever feeling like it was home, more like an exceptionally elegant hotel where she happened to have permanent residency. Gyom-ren took his coffee at 6 a.m. in the study, reviewed reports she'd learned not to ask about, and left for business by 7. She worked from the second bedroom she'd converted to an office, freelance translation projects that kept her visa legitimate and her days occupied. They crossed paths at dinner 3 nights a week, maximum. Polite conversation about weather, current events, anything that didn't require actual intimacy. The charity gala is Thursday, Gyom-rin said over Tuesday's dinner, prepared by his private chef and served with the same elegant precision as everything else in his world. You'll need something appropriate. I've arranged for a stylist. I have dresses. You have clothes suitable for translation conferences. His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. This requires something that photographs well. Image matters at these events. Image. That's what she was, a carefully curated piece of his public persona, the American wife who made him look internationally connected, sophisticated, legitimate. She provided plausible deniability when business associates needed to believe Yong Gyom-rin was just a successful entrepreneur, not the man who controlled half of Seoul's underground economy. She'd known what she was agreeing to when they married. 29 years old, stuck in Seoul on an expiring student visa, no family back in the States worth returning to, and a military service record that made civilian employers nervous. Gyom-rin offered citizenship, financial security, and the freedom to live her life without interference. In exchange, she played the wife at necessary functions and didn't ask questions about the men who visited at odd hours or the conversations conducted entirely in rapid Korean she pretended not to understand. The navy Valentino will be fine. I've already arranged the stylist. Not negotiating, stating facts. She'll be here Wednesday at 2. Niel nodded, took another bite of food prepared by someone else, served in a home that wasn't really hers, playing a role in a marriage that existed on paper and in public photographs, but nowhere else. That night, she heard him on the phone in his study, door closed but voices carrying through expensive construction that prioritized aesthetics over soundproofing. Korean mixed with English, the latter for her benefit probably, though he didn't know she'd spent 3 years learning his language in secret. Han Sung-gil is escalating, he said to whoever was listening. He's targeting the pharmaceutical distribution, publicly. The man has no subtlety. A pause. No, keep Niel out of it. She's civilian. She doesn't need to know details. Civilian. After 3 years, that's how he still saw her, the foreign wife who provided legitimacy but couldn't be trusted with reality. She went to bed in her room, custom mattress, 1,000 thread count sheets, all the luxury money could buy, and stared at the ceiling. wondering when exactly she'd stopped pretending their careful distance was what she actually wanted. Probably around month 6, definitely by year 2, but admitting that would require vulnerability neither of them had agreed to provide. So she closed her eyes and practiced the role she'd perfected, the elegant, quiet wife who didn't ask questions and definitely didn't lie awake wondering what her husband's voice would sound like saying her name like she actually mattered. The Grand Hyatt's ballroom smelled like money and hypocrisy, designer perfume layered over the sharp scent of ambition disguised as charity. I stood beside Guillaume in a gown that cost more than my first car, playing the role I'd perfected over 3 years, elegant, quiet, decorative, the perfect Mafia wife who didn't ask questions. Han Sung-gil approached during cocktail hour, timing it precisely when Guillaume was across the room in conversation with a Seoul city councilman. Sung-gil was everything my husband wasn't. Loud, aggressive, the kind of gangster who made power obvious through gold chains and raised voices. Mrs. Young, he used my married name with mocking emphasis, standing too close. Such a waste, keeping a woman like you to decoration, if you ever want to experience real power instead of your husband's tea ceremony version of running an empire. His hand closed on my arm, possessive, proprietary, crossing every boundary Guillaume world pretended to respect. I moved without thinking. Muscle memory from 6 years as a military combat trainer, the skills I'd never mentioned to Guillaume because he'd never asked about my life before we married, and I'd never volunteered. My left hand caught his wrist, twisting at precisely the angle that hyperextends the joint. My right hand struck his elbow, forcing the arm to bend against its natural resistance. 3 seconds. One controlled application of force. The snap was audible across the ballroom. Seung-gil hit the marble floor, his wrist bent at an angle that made several guests gasp. His bodyguards reached for weapons, then froze, confused whether to defend a boss who'd just been dropped by a woman in evening wear. The ballroom went silent. 200 of Seoul's elite staring at the American wife who'd just broken a Mafia boss's wrist with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done worse to better trained opponents. I looked down at Seung-gil, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. You put your hands on me without permission. In my world, that has consequences. Consider this a lesson in consent. Then I stepped over him, smoothing my gown, and walked toward the bar like I'd just corrected someone's pronunciation rather than ended a man's evening in the emergency room. Guillaume met me halfway. His expression was perfectly controlled, the elegant mask he wore in public that revealed nothing. But I'd lived with him for 3 years. I recognized the slight tightness around his eyes, the way his jaws set just fractionally harder. We're leaving, he said quietly, his hand at my elbow, guiding, not grabbing. Now. His security formed around us with practiced efficiency, escorting us through a ballroom still frozen in shock. Behind us, Seung-gil's men were helping him up, his wrist already swelling, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. In the car, Guillaume was silent for 3 blocks. Then, without looking at me, he said, "You've been trained." Not a question, a statement. 6 years, military combat instructor, Fort Bragg. I assume based on the technique. I kept my voice level, honorably discharged. It's all in the background check you ran before we married. You put security consulting on the visa application. That's what I put on the visa application. Sounds better than, I can kill someone with my bare hands in under 10 seconds. He finally looked at me, and his expression was something between fury and fascination. What else haven't you told me? You never asked. I met his eyes. We've lived together for 3 years like polite strangers. You don't ask about my past, I don't ask about your business. That was the arrangement. The arrangement, he repeated slowly, didn't include my wife breaking a rival boss's wrist in front of Seoul's entire social circle. Your rival put his hands on me. What did you expect me to do? Wait for your security to handle it? I handled it myself. You're welcome. Something shifted in his expression, the mask cracking just enough to reveal the man underneath. We need to talk, he said quietly. Actually talk, not the careful distance we've maintained. About what?
about what our marriage actually is. His eyes held mine, because after tonight, everyone in Seoul knows it's not what we've been pretending. The penthouse was silent except for the Han River sliding past 40 floors below. Niel stood at the window still wearing her gala gown, blood from Seung-gil's split lip dried on her white glove. She'd removed the other. The asymmetry felt appropriate. Military? Guillaume-Ren's voice came from behind her. Not a question. He'd dismissed his security 20 minutes ago, after they'd returned from the Grand Hyatt through the service entrance like criminals instead of the hosts. Now combat trainer, Fort Bragg, I assume, based on the technique. Niel didn't turn. Fort Benning, 6 years, honorably discharged. You never asked what I did before Seoul. I asked what you needed. He stopped 3 feet away, always 3 feet, the distance they'd perfected. Citizenship, financial security, a marriage that didn't require explanations. And I delivered. Niel finally turned. Elegant American wife, appropriate smile at appropriate events, no questions about why your business associates have blood under their fingernails. You broke a man's wrist at a charity gala. He put his hands on you. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Possessive. 3 years of careful neutrality cracking like Seung-gil's bones. On what's mine. Something shifted in Guillaume-Ren's expression. Not quite surprise, he was too controlled for that, but recognition maybe, of a truth they'd both been avoiding. What else? He asked quietly. What else haven't I told you? Niel pulled off the blood-stained glove, let it fall. Counter-surveillance, tactical analysis, small arms certification. I can field strip a Glock in 14 seconds, and I've been timing your security team's response patterns for 18 months. I met his eyes. Your second guard on the east rotation smokes at 2 a.m., creates a 7-minute gap. I've been meaning to mention it. 18 months? I got bored. The confession felt dangerous, intimate. Playing decorative gets tedious when you used to teach soldiers how to kill efficiently. Guillaume-Ren moved then, closing the 3 feet to stand directly in front of her. Close enough she could see the gold threading in his collar, smell his cologne mixing with the faint copper of someone else's blood. Close enough to count the beats of his pulse in his throat. What else, Niel? The question wasn't about skills anymore. She took a breath. I stopped thinking of this as an arrangement around month 6. I've been lying about it since then, to you, to myself. And when Seung-gil touched you tonight, I wanted to break more than his wrist. Guillaume-Ren caught her hand before it could fall. His grip was warm, certain. I've been maintaining distance because I thought you wanted the marriage to stay transactional. Did it work? His thumb traced her knuckles, already bruising purple. No, not for a long time. 2 weeks after the gala, Niel was Grikar's back when Guillaume-Ren's sedan pulled into the underground garage beneath the Gangnam office tower. She'd been following him for 6 days, using rotation patterns in traffic gaps his security team hadn't noticed. Old habits from Benning, new motivation from watching Seung-gil's people circle closer. She saw the ambush van before his driver did.
Niel was out of her car and moving before Guillaume-Ren's door opened. 2 men, both armed, positioning at angles his bodyguards wouldn't see until too late. She crossed the concrete in silence, heels abandoned in her front seat 3 blocks ago. The first attacker registered her presence half a second before her elbow connected with his throat. He went down choking. The second one turned, raising his weapon, but Niel had already closed the distance. She trapped his gun hand, redirected, used his momentum to slam him into the van hard enough that the impact echoed through the garage. Guillaume-Ren's security finally reacted, weapons drawn, shouting Korean commands that came too late to matter. Her husband stood beside his car, absolutely still, watching her press a knee into the second attacker's spine while his team secured the scene. Mrs. Yoon, his security chief's voice was tight. We didn't see. I know. Niel stood, breathing controlled despite the adrenaline. You weren't looking for a tail in a silver Genesis with rotating plate positions. Guillaume-Ren dismissed his team with a gesture. They hesitated, then obeyed, dragging both attackers toward the stairwell. The garage went quiet, except for fluorescent lights humming overhead. 6 days. His voice was arctic.
You've been following me for 6 days. 8, actually. You just noticed 6 days ago. She met his stare. Your counter-surveillance awareness drops 15% when you're on calls. You do it every Tuesday and Thursday between the office and home. You've been tracking my patterns. Someone had to. Sung-gil's been escalating since I broke his wrist. Your security's good, but they're looking for obvious threats. She gestured at the van. Not patient ones. Gyamren moved toward her, each step measured, controlled fury and expensive tailoring. You made yourself a target. I made myself useful. You could have been killed. So could you. Nayel's voice cracked like a whip. That van had 3 men. Your security detail would have been outnumbered for 12 seconds. That's 11 seconds too long when they're using automatic weapons. He stopped inches away. How long? How long what? How long have you been... He gestured sharply, frustrated. Counter-surveillance, patterns, tracking patterns, putting yourself between me and attacks I didn't know were coming. Nayel looked at him, really looked, at the man she'd married for paperwork and stayed married to for reasons that had nothing to do with citizenship anymore. Since month 6, she said quietly, since I realized the arrangement stopped being an arrangement and I was too terrified to tell you. Gyamren's hand lifted, cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about the violence still humming in the air between them. I've been terrified for 18 months, of wanting this, of wanting you. We're idiots. Dangerous idiots. His forehead touched hers, with extremely poor timing. Above them, his security chief cleared his throat from the stairwell. Sir, we need to move. But neither of them moved. Not yet. The coffee shop on Itaewon Row became Nayel's religion. Every morning at 9:47 a.m., same corner table, same Americano, same 40-minute window where she sat perfectly visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore bright colors, red coat, white scarf, anything that photographed well from across the street. It took Sung-gil's people 3 days to notice the pattern. She spotted the first surveillance camera on day 4. Gyamren figured it out on day 6. She was walking her usual route back to the penthouse, deliberately predictable, deliberately exposed, when his car pulled alongside. The rear door opened. His security chief's expression promised violence if she didn't get in. The door closed behind her with a sound like a vault ceiling. 47 minutes. Gyamren didn't look at her. Every morning, same location, same seat facing the street. You've made yourself a standing target. I've made myself bait. Nayel adjusted her red coat. There's a difference. Explain it to me. His voice was too quiet, dangerously controlled. Explain how my wife, deliberately creating patterns that make her easy to kill, is anything other than suicide. Your security detail tracks 8 active threats against you. Sung-gil's escalating, 3 attempts in 2 weeks. She pulled out her phone, showed him the photos she'd been cataloging. That's resources not watching you, attention not planning your assassination. He finally looked at her. You're drawing fire. I'm redistributing it. Nayel met his stare. I'm a combat trainer, Gyamren. I know how to be visible without being vulnerable. That coffee shop has 4 exits, 3 sight lines I control, and your security team positioned in overlapping coverage patterns I designed. If Sung-gil moves on me, we'll see it coming. And if he doesn't move, if he just shoots you through the window, he won't. I'm worth alive as leverage. You taught me that. Everything in your world is about value and positioning. Right now, I'm repositioning his attention away from you and toward a target he thinks is soft. You are not bait. I'm an asset, and you need to trust that I know the difference. I spent 6 years teaching soldiers how to stay alive in hostile territory. Seoul's just a different battlefield. Gyamren's hand gripped. If something happens to you, then you'll burn Seoul getting me back. I know. But nothing's going to happen because I'm better trained than anyone Sung-gil can send, and because your security team is finally listening to someone who knows what she's doing. They answered to me. And I'm your wife. Start acting like that means partnership instead of protection. The car went silent. Outside, Sol slid past in afternoon traffic. Inside, her husband looked at her like he was recalculating every assumption he'd ever made. "The coffee shop on Itaewon Row," he said finally. "Tomorrow, I'm adding 2 more guards." "Fine, but they follow my positioning."
Agreed. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. "Anything else you're planning I should know about?" Nael grinned. "Several things, but I'll brief you over dinner." The first strategy session happened at 2 a.m. in Gyamrin's office, the one room in the penthouse Nael had never entered in 3 years of marriage. He'd summoned her wearing reading glasses and exhaustion, blueprints of Sung-gil's operations spread across mahogany like a dissection. "His shipments come through Incheon every 3rd Wednesday," Gyamrin gestured at the port layouts. 8 routes, rotating schedule. My people can't predict which one. Nael studied the maps for 30 seconds. "You're thinking like a criminal. Think like military logistics." She traced 3 routes with her finger. "These have the shortest customs exposure. If I'm moving illegal cargo on a schedule, I minimize inspection windows. He'll use these 3, weighted toward this one during shift changes." Gyamrin leaned back. "You got that from 30 seconds?" "I got that from 6 years teaching convoy security." She met his eyes over the blueprints. "You want to stop his shipments or destroy his credibility with suppliers?" "Both. Then we don't intercept. We let customs find it." She smiled. Anonymous tip, timed perfectly. He loses product and reputation. 2 problems, 1 solution. He started including her every night after that. The partnership shifted like tectonic plates, subtle until suddenly everything had rearranged. Nael's tactical analysis stripped Sung-gil's operations down to vulnerable patterns. Gyamrin's criminal resources turned those patterns into surgical strikes. 3 weeks in, they'd cost Sung-gil $4 million and half his supplier network without throwing a single punch. "You're terrifying," Gyamrin said one night, watching her mark elimination targets with the same focus she brought to morning coffee. "You're just noticing now?" Nael didn't look up from the surveillance photos. "No, I'm just saying it out loud now." He moved behind her chair, hands settling on her shoulders. "We're destroying him. We're protecting you." She leaned into his touch, 3 years of careful distance finally abandoned. "There's a difference." His thumb traced the tension in her neck. "When did this become an us?" "Probably month 6, like everything else we were too scared to admit." She turned to face him. "You're not protecting me from your world anymore." "Because you're part of it now." His fingers threaded through her hair. "And you're better at strategy than half my advisors." "All your advisors." She pulled him closer. "And you're better at listening than most commanding officers I've worked with." High praise from a military professional. Take the compliment, Yoon. But she was smiling, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the man's world she'd infiltrated more thoroughly than any enemy ever could. They stopped pretending the work sessions were just business, stopped pretending the marriage was still an arrangement, started touching casually, his hand at her waist during briefings, her fingers straightening his collar before meetings with associates who no longer questioned the American wife's presence at the table. Seoul's most dangerous man had found his match, and she'd been living in his penthouse for 3 years, waiting for him to notice. The coffee shop ambush came on a Tuesday, which meant Sung-gil had been watching long enough to know Tuesdays had the smallest security window. Nael registered the van half a second before the chloroform, just enough time to trigger the panic button sewn into her coat lining. Then everything went dark. She woke in a warehouse with zip ties and 3 guards who looked bored. They'd taken her coat, her phone, her shoes, left her in the designer dress she'd worn to look unthreatening. Amateur mistake. The zip ties broke in 40 seconds using the door hinge technique they'd clearly never seen. The first guard went down when she used his momentum to slam his head into concrete. The second one actually pulled his weapon, but Nael had already closed distance. Disarm, control, incapacitate. He crumpled beside his partner.
The third guard was smarter. He ran. Nayel was zip-tying the unconscious ones with their own restraints when Yamrin's security team breached the warehouse. 6 men, full tactical gear, weapons drawn. They stopped short at the scene, her in a torn dress, 2 guards unconscious, and Sungil's lieutenant bleeding from his nose in the corner. Then Yamrin came from the door. She'd never seen him lose composure, not once in 3 years. But the man who entered that warehouse wasn't the controlled crime lord who conducted business over tea ceremonies. He was terrified rage in an expensive suit, moving toward her with the single-minded focus of someone who just confronted the worst fear they'd ever known. Nayel. Her name came out rough, broken. His hands framed her face, searching for damage. Did they... I'm fine. She caught his wrists. Yamrin, I'm fine. They barely had me 6 hours. 6 hours. He pulled her against him, and she felt him shaking. Actually shaking. I thought, when the trackers showed the warehouse. I know. But I told you I'm not soft. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Really look. At the torn dress and bruised knuckles, and the absolute certainty in her eyes that she'd never needed rescuing in the first place. You escaped. Of course I escaped. They used zip ties. She almost smiled. Did you think I was sitting here waiting for you? I thought, his voice cracked, I thought I'd lost you. The warehouse went absolutely silent. His security chief cleared his throat uncomfortably. Yamrin ignored them all. When I got the alert, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past getting to you. His forehead pressed against hers. This stopped being transactional a long time ago. I've been lying to myself about how much I know. Nayel's fingers threaded through his hair. Me too. Since month 6, remember? I love you. The confession came out like violence, raw and unstoppable, and I almost lost you because I let you make yourself bait. You didn't let me do anything. I chose it. She kissed him, soft and certain. Partnership means trusting me to fight my own battles. Then fight them beside me, not alone. Deal. They didn't go home. Yamrin dismissed his security to a perimeter and took Niel to the penthouse's rooftop garden, the one place in Seoul where they could have a conversation without 40 floors of criminal empire listening. Dawn was breaking over the Han River. She was still barefoot, still in the torn dress. He'd given her his suit jacket somewhere between the warehouse and the car. Month 6, Yamrin said quietly, standing at the railing. You said month 6. What happened? Niel moved beside him. You made tea. Real tea, the kind that takes 20 minutes and complete focus. You were stressed about something, never told me what, and you just made tea. She smiled at the memory. And I realized I'd married someone who processed violence through precision. Someone who understood control the way I did. Someone I could actually love if I let myself. So you didn't let yourself? I got engaged once before Seoul. He was military too. We understood each other, or I thought we did. Her hands tightened on the railing. Then he deployed, found someone else, and sent the breakup email while I was teaching hand-to-hand combat to kids who'd actually die if I wasn't focused. Vulnerability got me that, so I learned not to want it. Yamrin turned to face her fully. I've been maintaining distance because every person I've ever trusted has tried to use it against me. Competitors, associates, family. His voice went rough. I thought you wanted the arrangement. Safe, transactional. I thought if I kept my distance, you'd stay. Instead, we both stayed lonely in the same penthouse for 3 years. Yes, he caught her hand. But when I saw that warehouse location, when I thought Sungil had you, he stopped, started again. I would have burned Seoul. Every territory, every alliance, everything I've built. All of it meant nothing compared to getting you back. That's not transactional. No, it's terrifying. His thumb traced her bruised knuckles. I'm in love with you. Have been since you corrected my security chief's tactical assessment 8 months ago, and he actually listened. You were wearing pajamas and drinking coffee like you hadn't just revolutionized our defensive strategy. Niall laughed, the sound wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. We're disasters. We're dangerous disasters who've been lying to each other while falling in love. He pulled her closer. I don't want the arrangement anymore, Niall. I want the real thing. Partnership, commitment. You beside me, not 3 feet away pretending we're strangers. I want that too. She looked up at him. But I'm scared. Vulnerability hasn't worked well for me historically. I'm scared too. Trust hasn't worked well for me either. His hands framed her face. But I trust you, with my empire, with my life, with this. Then we choose it. Niall's voice steadied. Not because it's convenient, not because we're trapped, because we want it. Consciously, together. Partnership. He kissed her as Seoul woke up below them, the city they'd protect together, the empire they'd build together, the marriage they'd finally chosen instead of endured. They came for Sung-gil on his own territory, which was the point. Not defense anymore, destruction. Niall wore white again, a deliberate callback to the gala where this started. Guillaume Ren wore violence like tailoring, his security team flanking them through Sung-gil's headquarters like they owned it. They would by morning. Sung-gil was waiting in his office, surrounded by armed men who looked nervous. Good, they should be. Yoon, Sung-gil smiled, ugly and desperate. You brought your wife to a war zone. How romantic. I brought my partner to end this. Guillaume Ren's voice was ice. You have 10 seconds to surrender your operations before I dismantle them myself. Sung-gil laughed, pulled a gun, aimed it at Niall. Put down your weapons or I kill your wife. The room went silent. Guillaume Ren's security didn't move. Niall just looked at Sung-gil like he was something she'd stepped in. You still don't understand. She took a step forward, ignoring the weapon trained on her. I'm not his weakness. I'm not leverage. Another step. I am the weapon, and you put your hands on my husband. She moved. 3 seconds. The gun clattered across marble. Sung-gil hit the floor choking, Niall's knee in his spine, her hands controlling his neck with the precise pressure that meant unconsciousness in 5 seconds or death in 10. Your choice, she said quietly. Surrender or stop breathing. Guillaume Ren's team swept the room. Sung-gil's men dropped weapons, smart enough to recognize when they'd lost. Outside, coordinated raids hit every one of Sung-gil's operations simultaneously. Niall's tactical planning, Guillaume Ren's resources, perfectly synchronized. The empire fell in 4 hours. By dawn, Sung-gil was in custody and his organization was history. 3 months later, the Grand Hyatt hosted another charity gala. Niall stood beside Guillaume Ren in custom white, his hand resting at her waist like it belonged there, because it did. Seoul's elite circulated carefully, giving them space that had nothing to do with respect and everything to do with fear. They're staring, she murmured. Let them. His thumb traced circles against her hip. They're trying to figure out if you're the crime lord's wife or his enforcer. Both, she smiled at an ambassador who looked away quickly. Partnership, remember? How could I forget? He pulled her closer. You redesigned my entire security structure last week. It needed work. It needed you. He pressed a kiss to her temple, public and possessive. I needed you. Just took me 3 years to admit it. Worth the wait? Every terrifying second. Across the ballroom, someone whispered. Niall caught fragments. Broke Sung-gil's empire, military training, don't cross the American wife. She'd come to Seoul for citizenship and safety. She'd found partnership with the most dangerous man in the city. The trophy wife became a warrior queen. The unknown husband became a partner willing to burn the world to keep her safe. And the marriage that started as paperwork, it became the most feared alliance Seoul had ever seen. Guillaume Ren's hand tightened on her waist. Ready to terrify some more donors? Always. Niall smiled, sharp and certain. That's what partnerships do. They moved through the gala together, elegant, sophisticated, and absolutely lethal, just the way they both preferred it.